بعد أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألم يأن الذين آمنوا أن تخشع قلوبهم لذكر الله وما نزل من الحق ولا يكونوا كالذين أوتوا الكتاب من قبل فطال عليهم الأمد فقست قلوبهم وكثير منهم فاسقون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah al-Hadid in this beautiful famous ayah, isn't it time that those who have iman in their hearts, that they develop a fear of Allah in their hearts, and they don't become like those before them, when a long time had passed and their hearts became hard, and several of them, many of them were disobedient, fasiq. As we learned last week in the Khutbah, we talked about the mission of Isa alayhi salam and his purpose, and the behavior and the disobedience and the ingratitude and the finding the loopholes of the children of Israel, what that resulted in for them, where laws became hard for them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, حَرَّمْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ طَيِّبَاتٍ أُحِلَّتْ لَهُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made haram for them what was halal for them. Their hearts were sealed. فَقَسَتْ قُلُوبُهُمْ. They lost political might. وَضُرِبَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ الذِّلَّ وَالْمَسْكَنَةِ. And most importantly, وَبَاءُوا بِغَضَبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ. And they earned anger from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was urging them, just like He urges us, to show gratitude for the revelation that we have, for the blessings that we have, blessings that we are born with, blessings that we attain through our lifetime, and the preference Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us. Musa alayhi salam told his nation, اذكروا نعمة الله عليكم. Remember the blessings of Allah upon you. is جعل فيكم أنبياء. You had prophets over prophets over prophets, hundreds, maybe thousands of prophets were sent to Bani Israel to continue to guide them. وَجَعَلَكُمْ مُلُوكًا. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had appointed kingship among them. وَآتَاهُمْ مَا لَمْ يُؤْتِ أَحَدًا مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ. And they were given what no other nation in the world was ever given. What was it? Prophethood, kingship, preference from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that no one on earth at that time had. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took a promise from them, as we learned last week, when the mountain of Tur Sinai was raised over their head. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what? We talked about Shema Israel, right? خُذُوا مَا آتَيْنَاكُمْ بِقُوَّةٍ. Hold firmly what you have in this Torah. Hold it firmly. What does it mean? Obey its commandment. Remember it. Ayah continues. وَاذْكُرُوا مَا فِيهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. And then remember, recite what's in there so that you develop taqwa. You're going to lose taqwa, people. Remember, recite, hold it firmly. ثُمَّ تَوَلَّيْتُم مِّن بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ. But you left. You left that way. You left that sunnah. You didn't heed that commandment. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran gives us a case study. We are going to talk about the story of Sabbath, Shavuot, as they say in Hebrew, Sabbath as they say in English. What does Sabbath mean? Sabbath, it means Saturday. The word Sabbath actually comes from, as we learned in Surah An-Naba, Subata. And we have, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and we have made sleep as a means for taking rest for you. So Sabbath, Saturday, means a day of rest. Why Saturday? Why was Saturday made holy for the Jews? Let's look into that very, very quickly. As we all know, in Genesis 2, it is said that God said, on the sixth day, God finished the work, I'm reading it literally, that He had done, and He rested on the seventh day. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need rest. It may be that in the original Torah, some semblance of an ayah comes to us. It might be incorrect. It might have some validity. There's definitely validity. We learned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran told us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the heavens and the earth and the universe in 6 days. So this ayah, this verse in the Bible definitely holds some validity. However, where it says he rested the seventh day, maybe it actually meant God stopped creating the universe on the seventh day. Sixth day, it was complete, but it was misunderstood and it became the day of rest. Wallahu a'lam. But we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran definitively, وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and we have indeed created this universe and whatever is between them, فِي سِتَّةِ أَيَّامٍ, in 6 days, وَمَا مَسَّنَا مِن لُغُوبٍ, and we don't get tired. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this doesn't tire us. And this comes over and over in the Quran. But why Saturday? It was actually originally meant to be Friday. Friday was actually designated for the Jews. We learn from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam from Hadith Muslim, where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, خير يوم طلعت عليه الشمس يوم الجمعة. The best day on which the sun rises is Jumu'ah. On it, Adam alayhi salam was created. On it, Adam alayhi salam entered Jannah. On the day of Friday, Adam alayhi salam exited Jannah. On that day will be the day of judgment when it begins. But when Musa alayhi salam came with that commandment to them, and what was that commandment? We don't have the details. They are hidden from us, but we can surmise that just like for us Muslims, what was asked of the Bani Israel by Musa alayhi salam was to observe the holiness of Friday for all the virtues that Jumu'ah has. And that they remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do dhikr and whatever revelation in the Torah had come to them and the commandments that were given to them, they remember them every week and do that for a short period. We can surmise that that's what was ordained upon them by Musa alayhi salam from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, they disputed. They're like, we don't want to do this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala became angry with them as a result, because they didn't want to give up a few moments of their precious Friday for the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in Hadith Muslim we learn, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, أَدَلَّ اللَّهُ عَنِ الْجُمْعَةِ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided them away from Jumu'ah. مَنْ كَانَ مِنْ قَبْلِنَا. And Saturday is when it was ordained to them, فَكَانَ لِلْيَهُودِ يَوْمُ السَّبْتِ, and for the Jews, day of Saturday became holy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now forced them to have the whole Saturday, starting from the sunset of Friday, starting from the, how the day starts in our Sharia at the sunset. From sunset of Friday till Isha time on Saturday, they not only have to do dhikr, they can't do any work. They can't even lift a finger. All they're supposed to do is just contemplate to do dhikr. How Sharia became this extreme harshness from them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, this was done, إِنَّمَا جُعِلَ السَّبْتِ, we had made Saturday holy for them, عَلَى الَّذِينَ اخْتَلَفُوا فِيهِ, because they disputed about it. They didn't want Friday. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was harsh on them. Fine. All day Saturday, you are going to have to spend in the contemplation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you're going to do Torah. You can't cook, you can't clean, you can't work. All you do is dhikr. Till today, this is how the Orthodox people, they observe the Sabbath. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the story of a people by the sea that disobeyed this commandment because they couldn't handle it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-A'raf, وَاسْأَلْهُمْ عَنِ الْقَرْيَةِ الَّتِي كَانَتْ حَاضِرَةَ الْبَحْرِ. There was a people, ask the city, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says figuratively, those people that were by the sea, إِذْ يَعْدُونَ فِي السَّبْتِ, they transgressed the Sabbath day. They transgressed what they were supposed to do, not do any work, not cook or clean, not do anything except dhikr of Allah. They broke that. How did they break that? إِتَّأْتِيهُمْ حِيتَانُهُمْ, when fish came to them in the sea, يَوْمَ سَبْتِهِمْ شُرَّعًا, fish came to them on Saturday that was supposed to be a Sharia as a day that was holy for them. They were not supposed to fish on Saturday. وَيَوْمَ لَا يَسْبِتُونَ, and the day they were not observing the Sabbath, لَا تَأْتِهِمْ, the fish didn't come to them. كَذَلِكَ نَبْلُوهُمْ, This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this is how we tested them, بِمَا كَانُوا يَفْسُقُونَ, because of the disobedience that they continued to show. In short, what had happened, as we understand from other narrations, on Friday, no fish came, but on Saturday, fish came. So what they did, and this happened, so they figured out the pattern, and they okay, they found a loophole. What was the loophole? They put the nets out Friday, so that on Saturday, when they're supposed to observe the Sabbath, they observed the Sabbath while their nets were catching fish. And on Sunday, when the Sabbath was over, they're okay, now we have our fish. Did they break the Sabbath? Technically, you know how we Muslims, we cheat and find loopholes in the Sharia and our fiqh? Did they break the Sabbath? They observed the Sabbath. They contemplated. They didn't cook. They didn't clean. They didn't wash dishes. They didn't go to work. They contemplated. But what were they really doing? There were nets that were set on that day catching fish. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says they broke the Sabbath. They transgressed bounds. Because they found a loophole. This is how Allah had tested them. Because Allah brought the fish on Saturday when they were supposed to be resting. What was their punishment? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَمَّا نَسُوا مَا ذُكِّرُوا بِهِ, when they forgot what they were supposed to be reminded of, which is not the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. That is what we should be looking at. This is what we should learn from this story. That we're not supposed to be looking at the letter of the law, we're supposed to look at the spirit of the law. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَخَذْنَا الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا بِعَذَابٍ بَئِيسٍ. They had a horrible punishment, those who broke the Sabbath, بِمَا كَانُوا يَفْسُقُونَ, for the corruption that they sowed, for the laws that they broke. فَلَمَّا عَتَوْا عَنْ مَا نُهُوا عَنْهُ, when they did what they were not supposed to do, قُلْنَا لَهُمْ كُونُوا قِرَدَةً خَاسِئِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told them, be like monkeys. Some scholars say they actually became monkeys. Some scholars say that it is figurative. Wallahu alam. There's a hadith. Yes, they became monkeys, but they couldn't procreate. So there were no generations of monkeys after that. They became monkeys. That was their punishment. Even though they followed the letter of the law, they didn't follow the spirit of the law. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَكِنْ, and, however, لَعْنَمُهُ اللَّهُ بِكُفْرِهِمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cursed them for their kufr. Kufr meaning here disobedience. And you become a kafir when you disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَلَا يُؤْمِنُونَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. And only few of them believed. لَعَنَّا أَصْحَابَ السَّبْتِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the people of the Sabbath, those fishermen, they were cursed. وَكَانَ أَمْرُ اللَّهِ مَفْعُولًا. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made an example out of them. فَجَعَلْنَاهَا نَكَالًا لِمَنْ بَيْنَ يَدَيْهَا وَمَا خَلْفَهَا. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made them an example for the people that came after them, وَمَوْعِظَةً لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, and a counsel for the believers. This is why we're talking about this. We should be taking heed from this. We should be learning lessons. As we talked about last week, we are not reading the stories of the children of Israel and the Jews just so that we can make fun of them, or astaghfirullah. We're supposed to take heed from them. These stories are in the Quran for us. Just like this, the Sahaba or the Tabi'un, they were doing this. They were reading the Quran and they were talking about ayat, and they were saying, Inna hada fi Bani Israel. This is for Bani Israel. So a famous Sahabi, Hudayfa, he was passing by. And he was sarcastic towards them. He said, Ni'mal ikhwatu Banu Israel. How amazing, how great are your brothers, the children of Israel. In kana lakumul hulu, for you is all sweetness, like all good things are for you. Walahumul mur, and for them is all bitterness. Is that what you think? He said, Kalla, no, not at all. Walladhi nafsi biyadi hatta tahdu sunnata bis sunnah, that you will follow their footsteps. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran reminds us that these stories are not for the nations of the past, so you feel sorry for them. It is for us to take lessons. لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي قَصَصِهِمْ عِبْرَةٌ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in these stories there are lessons for those of intellect. In Surah Nazi'at, إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لِعِبْرَةً لِمَنْ يَخْشَى. For those who have a fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they take lessons from the stories in the Quran. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam promised. In Sahih al-Bukhari, he says, لَتَتَّبِعُنَّ سَنَنَ مَنْ قَبْلَكُمْ شِبْرًا بِشِبْرٍ وَذِرَاعًا بِذِرَاعٍ, that you will absolutely, definitely follow the footsteps of the nations before you. Handspan by handspan, cubit by cubit, meaning step by step, you will follow their ways. حَتَّى لَوْ سَلَكُوا جُحْرَ الضَّبِّ لَسَلَكْتُمُ, even until when they go in the hole of a lizard, figuratively speaking, you will follow them in the hole of the lizard. The Sahaba Karam got confused. He's like, Ya Rasulullah, al-Yahud wa nasara? Are you talking about the Jews and the Christians? Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, Faman? And who else am I talking about? Yes, indeed. This should give us scare. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking about the children of Israel and the people of Sabbath. أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِينَ يُزَكُّونَ أَنفُسَهُم? Don't you see those people who considered themselves all righteous and pure? بَلِ اللَّهُ يُزَكِّي مَن يَشَاءُ. Only Allah makes pure who He wills to make pure. This is why this thing that we talked about today and last week is what we make dua for all the time. How? In Surah Al-Fatiha, every single rak'ah, we say, Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim, O Allah, guide us to the straight path. Sirat al-Ladhina an'amta alayhim, the path of those who you have blessed. Ghayr al-Maghdubi alayhim, not the path of those that you showed your anger on, O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you read the Quran, the anger of Allah is over and over shown for the children of Israel, almost exclusively in the Quran. So the scholars say, the maghdubi alayhim, those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed their anger to, were the Jews. This is why we say, oh Allah, don't make us like them. Show us the straight path. We don't consider ourselves pure. We ask for guidance all the time. This is the whole purpose of the salah. Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told them, hold on to this book, hold on to this covenant. And we have the Quran. Just think about this as we read these ayat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, didn't I tell you to hold on to this firmly? ميثاق الكتاب ألا يقولوا على الله إلا الحق, that you say to Allah only what is appropriate. You don't make up your own deen, you don't find loopholes, you follow the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. وَدَرَسُوا مَا فِيهِ, and you continue to study what's in the Quran. How many of us actually pick up the Quran every day and take heed from it and do the tadabbur of the Quran? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us. وَدَرَسُوا مَا فِيهِ, aren't you supposed to be studying? Did I tell you to study this book? وَالَّذِينَ يُمَسِّكُونَ بِالْكِتَابِ, and those people who hold firmly to the book, to the revelation that they have. وَأَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةِ, and they continue to worship. إِنَّ لَا نُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُصْلِحِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not let go to waste the reward for those who try to make things right. This is the true test of the belief. In Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الَّذِينَ آتَيْنَاهُمُ الْكِتَابِ يَتْلُونَهُ حَقَّ تِلَاوَتِهِ. Those people who were given the book, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about another kind of people. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from among them. Those who were, when they're given the revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like we have the Quran, they recite it, giving it its due right. What is the due right? Just recite it with tajweed? Not even with tajweed? No. To contemplate, think, deeply study the book. Ask the people who, if you don't know. That is our purpose. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, these are the people, أُولَٰئِكَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِهِ. These are the people who actually believe in that book. Those who do that are the true believers. If you're not doing that, you don't really believe that this book is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you're supposed to be taking lessons from it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about now the other kind of people who are not focusing on the book, the Torah or the Quran. وَمَن يَكْفُرْ, and whoever does kufr, meaning they reject the book, they don't really give it its due right, فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْخَاسِرُونَ, and they will indeed be the losers. وَآخِرُ دَعْوَانَا الْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ.